This presentation is titled Impact of a Short Lecture on Connecting Students with the Museum Experience.
Hi, I'm Joanne Fenn, Assistant Professor and Collections Manager, Museum Registrar at Kent State University Museum.
And I'm Catherine Leslie, Associate Professor and Graduate Studies Coordinator at the Fashion School at Kent State University in Kent, Ohio. This study examines students' responses prompted by a classroom assignment to visit museum exhibitions, identify objects, and reflect on the experience after listening to a foundational historical lecture.
The Kent State University Museum opened in 1985 and features changing exhibitions in its 8 galleries. The collection started at 4,000 garments and today contains nearly 40,000 garments, textiles, and decorative arts. The museum holds one of the most comprehensive collections of fashionable design from the 18th century to the present. The Fashion School at Kent State University and the museum provide students with first-hand experiences with historic and contemporary fashions. As well, costumes representing many of the world's cultures.
Established in 1983, the Fashion School at Kent State University has been endorsed as a center of excellence by the Ohio Board of Regents. Currently, there are 1,500 fashion design and merchandising students, and the Fashion School has been recognized as one of the top schools in the United States. All fashion and pre-fashion majors are required to take an introductory course which covers the fashion industry from concept all the way to consumer. The course is named Fashion Fundamentals, and it's offered every fall and spring semesters with an enrollment of 220 students, or approximately 450 per year. Prior to the midterm exam, Fashion Fundamentals students listened to an overview of the styles of the 20th century. This was based on silhouettes of the 20th century and showed fashionable women's dress. After the lecture, students were then assigned to visit the adjacent museum exhibitions and reflect on the experience by completing an assignment sheet. This is the assignment sheet, which is also the instrument for this study. The first part, students identified garments seen during the lecture. They placed them in their time period, and then they reflected on the experience. The third part included a Likert type scale where students answered items about their experience at the museum, the value of the museum, and their intention to return.
In order to complete the assignment, students were instructed to visit 2 museum exhibitions, the Fashion Timeline and Pretty Pleats. The exhibition Fashion Timeline showcases the museum's world-class collection of historic fashion. The exhibition spans from the 1780s to the 1950s, showing the evolution of style and silhouettes. It also presents relevant political, technological, and cultural developments, lending a context to the garments. Only examples from 1900 to 1950 were appropriate for the assignment. The Pretty Pleats exhibition highlights countless variations of pleating. The pieces in this exhibition span more than 200 years of fashion history. The exhibition is organized by type of pleat and technique, rather than chronologically or geographically. Examples from 1900 to 1990 were appropriate for the assignment.
A limitation of this experience is what is available in the 8 galleries in the museum. So the students needed to identify those that fit into the 1900 to 1990 time period, and also Western styles or fashionable dress. As a result of the current exhibitions, fewer examples from the 1960 to 1990 decade were available for the students to apply to their assignment.
As a museum professional, it is not uncommon to see groups of students in the galleries charged with completing an assignment, but not necessarily connecting with the exhibition or the garments. This assignment allowed for a closer connection. For instance, a student would walk through the timeline exhibition and might select a garment that represents the 1950s, like this New Look-inspired 1959 garment that was exhibited. The student would write the decade of the garment description, and then the rationale for placing it within that decade.
For this study, assignments were collected over 3 semesters, and approximately 662 students participated in this assignment and study.
The responses were entered into an Access relational database designed for the study. The records were coded to ensure anonymity.
To characterize the sample, in spring 2014, the majority of the students were fashion merchandising majors. Within the class, there also are fashion design majors, pre-fashion majors, and other majors, which include students interested in fashion and fashion media minors who are journalism, mass communication majors.
The data was queried, and the most frequently selected decade was the 1920s, followed by the 1930 to 1950 time period. Only a very small percentage of students did not respond. Next, we wanted to see if the students accurately applied the same vocabulary words used in the short lecture. The data was queried on specific terms and then checked to make sure the intention was correct for the chosen decade. This graph represents how accurately students applied the proper vocabulary terms, decade by decade. For instance, if a student described a 1900s garment as Gibson Girl, then the accuracy was positive. Students were most successful at applying vocabulary terms for the 1950s silhouette, then the 1900s. The 1920s, while it was the most selected decade, had a slightly lower accuracy rate of 92.7. We can see on this graph that the decades of 1910, 1960, and 1970 received the lowest accuracy ratings of all the decades.
Students were also asked about their perceptions of the museum and the experience. They rated it on a 1 to 10 scale from positive to negative. This is an example of one of the student responses. The overall experience, we are happy to say, was predominantly positive, with about 92% of the students rating the experience at 8 or above. There were slight differences based on college major. The pre-fashion design majors gave the lecture and the museum visit the highest rating, with 96% rating it 8 and above. The lowest rating was given by non-fashion or other majors, who possibly were less connected with the material. In terms of the learning experience, we asked the students if the lecture helped them better understand the garments that they saw in the museum, and also if the lecture was critical to their experience at the museum. Overall, the students saw value in linking the lecture with the museum visit. Specifically, 92% of the students felt that the lecture helped them understand the museum objects. But when we asked if it was critical, 8 out of 10 felt that this was critical. So although not in the 90s, it still is notable that 8 out of 10 of the students felt that the lecture was critical to their museum experience.
Students were then asked for their perceptions of the museum as a resource for their major, as well as their intent to return to the museum outside of a classroom assignment. Good news! Overall, 94% of participating students saw the museum as a great resource. 81% said they plan to return.
In terms of implications, we found that after the introductory lecture, student comments revealed that they related to the objects on display and found connections or synthesized the information that they had heard and seen in the class lecture.
This combination of having a lecture along with visiting the museum with an assignment allowed the students to gain a visual vocabulary and increased museum literacy. The assignment reinforced and allowed them to apply the vocabulary on previously unfamiliar objects.
Therefore, even a short introduction may make museums and their objects more relevant, increasing inclusiveness with a wider range of audiences.
Museums
and faculty
can collaborate closely to create assignments for students in academic museums that foster and reinforce curriculum.
When thinking about future studies, additional explorations can include examining relationships between college major and the impact of the experience, tracking actual return visits in comparison with intention, and exploring rationale for selecting certain objects or time periods. Possibly the 1920s were the most popular time period because the silhouette changed so drastically from the periods before and after that, the 1920s. Or students may have recently seen the Great Gatsby movie and therefore connected or identified with that silhouette.
We have future plans that include curating and designing an exhibition that closely aligns with a lecture. This will provide a controlled setting for exploration in future studies.
Thank you.